On this episode of Technicolor Blood, we will tackle our best of 2018.
I am looking forward to it because the start of a new year is the perfect time for top 5 lists.
Technicolor Blood starts right now. Technicolor Blood, we are back again. My name's Chris. As always, I'm joined by Terrence, and we are going to talk about the best of 2018. We're going to each hit you with our top fives.
Top 5 lists. I love them. They're the best.
America loves lists, and we are not here to disappoint you. So we're going to hit you with our top 5 lists going backwards, of course. I see so many lists where they start at number 1. What are you doing when you do that?
Yeah, it's like people don't know how to work a list.
Yes. Then there's no surprise at the end. Anyway, all right. So we'll do our top 5. We'll pepper in some more stuff as we go along here, as we see fit, and you guys will just sit and enjoy the ride. So I'll start, I guess.
I like it.
All right, so number 5 was a blood war for me because I had a couple of movies that I really wanted to be in my number 5, and then I remembered another one, and that one became my number 5. So later I'll have some honorable mentions as a result of this fight. My number 5 of the year is Roma.
Okay.
By Alfonso Cuarón. Loved that movie. It was obviously very deeply personal for him. I'm such a huge fan of him as a director, so I was going along for the ride. He did some so interesting things towards the end. The way he built tension. Obviously, the visual style is always going to be there for him. You know, it wasn't really an accessible movie. I don't think there's not a lot of people who are going to jump in on that one and become huge Alfonso Cuarón fans. I don't think. But for someone who is already such a big fan like I am, I really loved that movie. And despite a couple of the warts that I thought it had, that one definitely hits my top 5.
Yeah, well, guess what? That was my number 5 choice as well.
Oh, great. Yes, we did not share these lists with each other before we started. So
yeah, and maybe we should have. But anyway, yeah, everything you said, double it for me. Big Alfonso Cuarón fan. As a result of that, there was no way I was not going to see this movie. You might ask, does that make you biased to enjoy it more? And there's probably some truth to that. But again, I think it's one of those things where if you're just a movie fan, if you're a movie buff, like if you're the kind of person who just you start a movie and you become immersed in that world and you just soak it all up, this is the movie for you. This is that kind of a film. The more you love the art and the technique of telling a story through a movie, the more you're going to enjoy what he's done with this film, because it's a masterful display of that ability and that skill. And, you know, I do have that thing where I just once in a while, I need to see something artsy. I just like, after I see, you know, Aquaman or some big thing, I just need to see something small and artsy. And if I could just pick, like if I, by fantasy was saying, I want to see just a purely artistic, artsy movie that director just made out of his brain, my number 1 choice for that would have been Alfonso Cuarón. So I very much enjoyed the movie. And the way I'm talking about it, you might think, why isn't it number 1? But I kind of did my list on just sort of how I felt coming out after the movie, like the enjoyability of it. It kind of more like a favorites list, not necessarily the best. So that's just kind of how I angled mine. Yeah, I sort of did it as a favorites list as well. My thinking was, why would I put a movie that I might have really enjoyed but have no interest in turning around and watching again right away higher than a film that I know I'm going to watch at some point in the next couple of months? Sure. So that's how I organized it. So what was your number 4 choice? My number 4 choice was A Star Is Born. Ah, okay. So A Star Is Born, Bradley Cooper directed. Awesome debut for him. That was his debut, right? As a director? Yes. I feel like we've hashed this out before, but you know, my brain. We might even have an entire episode devoted to it. Yes, that we do for sure. So A Star Is Born, I really enjoyed it when we saw it. I came out of the theater feeling good about it, feeling like it had some Oscar buzz to it. Lady Gaga, obviously, I was familiar with her as an artist, but didn't really know her music super well. I thought, did a great job as an actress, and that's not really her thing. She's a singer. She did a great job. Her music was great. Bradley Cooper, I thought, absolutely killed it as Jackson Maine. I think his performance as a director surprised me the most, but his performance acting in that I thought was also good. He did a great job of selecting a great DP, Matthew Labatique. Great supporting cast around him with Sam Elliott, and like I mentioned, Lady Gaga, a couple others.
And I thought he really hit a home run. I had a couple little issues with the way they ended the film, but it doesn't anger me or upset me looking back on it. And I just, for a movie that's basically another remake, which is something that we rail against all the time,
yes.
I really did enjoy it. I thought it put a fresh new twist on it. So that comes in at number 4 for me.
Well, I really enjoyed the film as well. It did not, however, make my list.
Okay.
It did fall into the category of honorable mentions. So it was close, but it just kind of got edged out for the top 5 slots that were available for me.
Okay.
It's a really good, rock solid film, and it's really excellently made. It's one of those films where I don't think it's ever better than the sum of its parts.
Sure.
And it had one part that just was so much better than all the other parts, and that was Bradley Cooper's performance, which you already touched on. I don't need to belabor the point, but he is excellent in this role, and it's worth seeing the film just for his performance alone. Everyone should see the film, but I just didn't quite give it enough of a place to squeeze in the top 5.
And the music too. I think it just bears repeating, because not only was it Lady Gaga's song, but I thought a couple of the Jackson Maine songs, that one that he sings in the bar, maybe it's time to let the old ways die. I thought that was a really cool, soulful song, and I'm kind of surprised it's not a bigger deal coming out of that movie, just personally. But
yeah, I don't really have that feeling. Like,
that's cool.
Those felt like movie songs to me, but
you were directly challenging my taste in music now.
Yes. Well, we'll get into that in a future episode. I want to tell you instead what my number 4 choice was.
Fine.
Number 4 for me was A Quiet Place.
Okay.
That was the directorial debut of John Krasinski.
Yep.
And in it, he plays the father. His wife, Emily Blunt, plays his wife in the film as well. And they have a couple of kids, and they live in this world where mankind has been all but decimated by these creatures that have an incredibly strong sense of hearing. And as a result of that, he crafted a film with virtually no dialogue. And all of the interaction between the actors is done, for the most part, silently. A lot of it with looks and just, visual cues from one to the other. And all of that is just something I've never seen in a movie before, certainly outside of a silent film.
I feel like when you're writing a script, you think to yourself, this is going to be really cool. We're going to do this with visual cues and not actual dialogue. But actually pulling that off effectively on screen is, I think, was probably a pretty big challenge.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that really impressed me about that one as well.
Yeah. And I mean, that's especially remarkable when you consider it is a first-time director, and obviously he kind of stacked the deck in his favor by casting himself and his wife, knowing that, they would have a great rapport, which they do. Both of them are very talented actors, and it just worked to the benefit of that film. And the creature was original. The threat was original. Just everything about the film just felt fresh and new. It wasn't just another iteration of Aliens or another iteration of Predator. It was something new.
I think horror in general just really took a step forward in 2018 and had some more unique movies going for it. I know you don't necessarily agree on some of the other ones that I would throw into that pile, but for sure that one was one.
Yeah, so for anyone out there who hasn't seen A Quiet Place, definitely add it to your list of films to catch soon, because it is worth the time.
So for me, A Quiet Place was one of the 2 movies in the aforementioned Blood War for number 5
okay.
that ended up being nudged out as an honorable mention. So yeah, that one, like you said, wholly original, surprisingly well done as a first timer for John Krasinski as a director. Not that I expected him to do poorly, but I was just surprised at how well he did do.
Yeah.
So that one hit honorable mention for me, but could have very easily been in the top 5 as well. All right, so we are down to number 3 now. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, my number 3 of the movie of the year is Mandy.
Okay.
Now, Mandy was a movie that we saw the trailer, we got really excited about it. We saw it, and I feel like we both didn't love it, but I really enjoyed it watching it when I did. And of all the movies I saw, I think of all the movies I saw in 2018, this is the one that comes back in my brain the most. When I think of visual style, when I think of some of the characters, when I think of just the incredible use of color in this movie, and how this director, Panos Cosmatos, just called from... I feel like he called from so many different styles and influences, but he managed to coalesce it into his super, super unique vision.
Yeah.
And I actually am kind of excited about watching this one again. I'd like to see it fairly soon. So Mandy, number 3 for me. I like I said, this one rattles in my head the most of all these. And, Nicolas Cage was Nicolas Cage in it. He was crazy over the top. He was himself. I don't feel like Cosmatos like really reined him in at all, but that kind of seemed like that was really part of the deal there. Cause I'm always real big on directors, talented directors getting the most out of an actor. And that really wasn't the dynamic to me. I just feel like he literally did. In fact, I think in that infamous toilet scene, the bathroom scene, he literally did just tell Nick Cage to do his thing. And for 5 uninterrupted minutes, you got like one of the most crazy Nick Cage performances ever.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. So that film did not make my top 5 list either. It did come in as an honorable mention. I sort of divvied my honorable mentions up by, sort of honorable mention by quality, the films that you would expect to be in someone's top 5 list that just didn't make it. They were edged out. And then I also had honorable mentions for fun, just movies that, no one would ever argue is an Oscar-worthy consideration, but they're just movies that are just fun, and they're the ones that you immediately go and tell all your friends, you need to see this movie. Mandy definitely falls into that category for me. So not quite top 5, but like you said, I think about it a lot. It was such that film is the visual version of a primal scream in the woods. It's just such a raw, over the top, and just intensely saturated film. Like the colors are intensely saturated, the performances are intensely saturated, the whole concept for it is just intense. That movie is intensity on film, and it definitely worth checking out for the kind of people who enjoy movies that are very, very different. That is not a movie for everyone.
Certainly
but
not.
For a very tiny sliver of the film community, that movie really hits a home run. And I kind of like you mentioned, I cannot wait to see the next film from this director. He's such an intriguing guy. He's marching to his own beat. And I really hope the success of this film, which was kind of surprisingly successful, I really hope it leads to an opportunity for him to, make, again, the kind of movie that he wants to make, but with a budget big enough that it would actually get into theaters with a wide release where a big mainstream audience would find out about it.
Yeah, and hopefully he wouldn't fall into that trap that a lot of directors do, where when they do get a big budget, suddenly something is not right anymore.
Right, yeah.
It's like the struggle of having to make everything work on a low, like a shoestring budget, somehow brings the best out of them, and then they get a pile of money. And, best example I can think of, at least off the top of my head, Wachowski brothers in The Matrix, that clearly had a low budget to it. If you really watch that movie, it's a pretty low budget movie.
The first one, yes.
And then they gave him a boatload of money and made 2 of the worst movies I've ever seen in my entire life. In the sequels.
Another great example of that, I think, is M. Night Shyamalan. His first couple movies that are super low budget work really, really well. As he starts getting successful and he starts getting bigger and bigger budgets, like everything just starts to dissolve and fall apart.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's just hope that's not the case with Panos Cosmatos, and let's hope he gets the opportunity.
He's definitely too weird to be grouped in with those other guys, so I would hope that he, I think he would be immune to that. That's my hope.
Yeah. You're probably right about that. Director to keep an eye on. All right, so you might be wondering what my number 3 pick was, and for me, the number 3 of the year was Mission Impossible Fallout.
Oh, okay. That's a surprise a little bit.
So to set the stage for that, I had not seen a Mission Impossible film previously since Mission Impossible 2. That was like 20 years ago. So I didn't know what to expect. I just went in with zero expectations, just wanted to see the movie that everyone was talking about and that was making so much money at the time. And I really enjoyed it. Like, it was just a lot of fun. And it reminded me of what it could be like when really talented people in Hollywood got together to make a really high quality, glossy action film. And that's what it is. It's just a fun action film. It's Tom Cruise is essentially playing a superhero in the form of a spy, and the director is just at the top of his game. It's just a really fun, entertaining film that I had no expectation that I would walk out of the theater just as good a mood as I was, as I ended up being after watching that film.
I think you really need to see Rogue Nation. If you haven't seen Rogue Nation yet.
So that's the one previous to Fallout.
That McQuarrie also did, that introduces the world to Rebecca Ferguson, who I just thought was so great in that movie. I think Rogue Nation is better than Fallout.
Right.
And it has a little bit less of the big action movie hokiness that Fallout did have at times. So I really feel like you need to see that one since you enjoyed this one so much. But yeah, Mission Impossible Fallout was a lot of fun. It definitely would hit my honorable mention of just straight up enjoyability. But we had watched Rogue Nation a couple nights before that to prepare. So since I liked Rogue Nation so much better, I guess it qualified a little bit as a disappointment, only because it wasn't better than Rogue Nation, but I didn't really expect it to be. So I still had a lot of fun watching it. And you're right. I love like sort of the, it's like a James Bond movie, but just better in every way, because I don't really care for a lot of the James Bond movies, and I feel like that was the feel that should be in some of those movies, and like it just like big set pieces, huge like high stakes action moments. I thought they did a pretty damn good job with the villains in this movie.
Oh yeah, for me one of the high points was Henry Cavill as the CIA operator who's sent to hunt down Ethan Hunt's team. I thought every time he was on screen, he just brings such a big hulking intensity, because he's such a big guy, and Tom Cruise is such a small guy. So when they match up against each other, you just expect Tom Cruise to get steamrolled. But even the way the fights are choreographed, he has to be a slightly smarter fighter. I think that's probably a great testament to the quality of this film, in that they put thought into how they were going to choreograph the fights. They're not just throwing punches at each other because one actor is so much bigger than the other one. They've sort of tweaked the style that each one of them uses in a subtle way, where you can just enjoy it as a fight, but if you actually start paying attention to it, you're like, oh, this is actually a lot more clever than maybe you would notice at first blush.
Sure. Yeah, they did a great job choreographing the fight scenes. That bathroom fight scene between Henry Cavill and Tom Cruise was, I think, and the third guy that was in there. It was like a three-way fight. That was sort of the highlight of the trailer, and it ended up being one of the best parts of the movie. I did, if you recall, have some problems with some of Henry Cavill's delivery on some of his dialogue. I felt like there was a couple of times where they just gave him a little bit too much dialogue without a break.
Right.
And that's a way I think that directors sometimes need to rein it in and realize what they have in an actor, and they can be great if they're just short bursts, cleverly written. And then sometimes when it goes on to a little bit of monologuing, you start exposing a little bit of the weaknesses. But for what that movie was supposed to be, I enjoyed it a great deal. So I'm kind of happy to see you put something that's a little bit more fun fare on your list like that.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, we're starting to get closer and closer to the end of this now. My number 2. And again, I did this based on just favorites, how much fun I had, Bohemian Rhapsody. I mean, we've talked about this movie at length. Was it a great film? No, I agree. There's a lot of problems with it that I don't disagree with, but just sheer fun and excitement and enjoyment that I've had in a movie theater. I really can't think of the last time I had this much fun watching a movie. And, I wanted more at the end. There was obviously the music is fantastic in it from Queen. Obviously, Rami Malek's performance as Freddie Mercury was fantastic. They had a lot of moments in that I really enjoyed, how they showed the way some of the songs were written. It's sort of come out now that a lot of that was bullshit, which is not really surprising. I mean, it's a movie.
I haven't read up on anything that's come out since the movie's release, really, so I don't really know the story to that.
I mean, it's not a documentary, so
right.
I feel like this is one of those movies that, had I not just sort of lost myself in the music and the performance by Rami Malek, I probably would have had a lot more criticisms for. But man, I'm not going to apologize for just going to a movie and having a lot of fun, because that doesn't happen a lot for me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bohemian Rhapsody was my number 2 pick as well.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah. One of those films that, kind of like I was saying with Mission Impossible Fallout, I didn't have any expectations at all going into this film. Like I was a fan of the band Queen, but I knew nothing about the actor. It was directed by Bryan Singer, who I'm not a huge fan of. So I just went in with zero expectations and ended up leaving the theater really, really happy that I'd seen that movie. The climax of it is, a great uplifting moment. But for me, the real power of that film is Rami Malek's performance as Freddie Mercury. I mean, he just channels that person. Like, it's a total transformation of an actor. You don't see the actor anymore. You only see the character. He delivers a great performance and definitely deserves all the accolades he gets. And I mean, if there had been a different performance in the lead, I can't imagine this film being in my top 5 because
sure.
none of the other elements of it I thought were that great. But when you add those other elements to this phenomenal star-making performance by this actor, it just easily found its place on my top 5 list.
Yeah, a lot of fun. I think that one will obviously have a lot of rewatchability, which is going to be more about the music than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, sort of maybe putting a little bit more examination into Rami Malek's awesome performance. But for sure, to me, that one has a lot of rewatchability. Hopefully they very soon have that sing-along release. I know there's a local theater that has already done it, but I've seen headlines about how there's sort of a more planned and marketed big release of that coming out, which I assume they're probably going to hold on to until the Oscar nominations, which are actually next week,
right,
when those come out, and then maybe they'll do the big release of the sing-along then.
Yeah, and there's no way Rami Malek is not nominated for Best Actor.
Oh yeah, he's a lock to be nominated, and I gotta believe he will be one of the top 2 vote getters at a minimum.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely.
Okay, before we get to our number 1, why don't we take a little side tangent here and talk about what were a couple of our picks for the worst of the year?
Yeah, so
no particular order.
I don't actually have a list. I instantly knew what my number 1 pick was going to be, and that's as far as I needed to think about it. And for me, the worst film of the year, and this is going to come as a huge surprise to everybody because it was a massive hit film. But for me, the worst movie of the year was Aquaman.
Oh yeah.
It's such a hard movie to enjoy because it's a mess. It's just a mess of a movie.
I have a list. I won't go through all. Well, I might just mention them all, but not to pile on. I would probably have to say that my worst of the year is Aquaman as well. I mean, I gave it an F, so yeah. I don't hand out, just like I don't hand out A pluses willy nilly. I don't hand out Fs willy nilly either. And I just really did not like anything about that movie. I couldn't find any high points, honestly. A couple others that are in here that I noted. Solo, a Star Wars story. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't put it worst of the year, but it's definitely one that just was bad to me, and it was very disappointing. Even though it didn't look great to me, it just didn't surprise me in any way.
Yeah.
I did eventually get around to seeing Jurassic World, and I loathed that movie. Mm-hmm. I when you told me that it was worse than the original, than the first one in the new, relaunch,
the previous Jurassic Kingdom.
Yeah, that worried me a little bit, and yeah, that was basically unwatchable to me. And you know what, I tried, but I just did not like Venom either. I just did not like Venom in any way. So those are the 4 that kind of popped up in my head. There might have been a couple others in there, but if I had to pin one for the worst of the year, I would have to go along with you and say Aquaman as well.
Yeah, and we should point out that you could come back with an argument and be like, well, what about this schlocky movie that came out on Netflix that has nobody you've ever heard of and was directed by nobody that will ever direct anything again? Okay, yeah, there are bad movies, but those are bad movies that are never intended to be good, right? Like no one talented was involved in that. Aquaman had everything. It had a virtually limitless budget. It had a hot commodity director. It has a star who is just blowing up right now. It had everything, and they threw everything at it. And when you have that many A-list factors involved to turn in a D-list movie, that means something. That deserves to be honored as a bad film.
Yeah, my scale for talking about bad movies, always number 1, the resources is an important factor for me. Because like you said, people you never heard of, directors you never heard of, there's just nothing to judge them on, really. I guess that's the best way to put it. I just hold to a higher standard when you actually have resources.
Yeah. Before we jump into our number 1 picks, I also have another category that I just wanted to throw out. Sure. And this is sort of a category that I just cobbled together because I want to give some credit to a particular film that didn't make my top 5 list, but is such a good special film that I just want to bring some attention to it and put it back on people's radars because most people never even heard of it, and the few who did just probably let it slip past them, and I think it deserves a little bit of credit. So I created a category of just best first director, right? And that includes big name people that we've already mentioned, like Bradley Cooper. This was his first film. John Krasinski, this year was his first film. Great films. We've already talked about him a little bit, but for me, the best first-time director, that award. And it's not even really the director that I want to honor so much as I just want to talk about the film. that film was 8th grade. It was so well made is the best way to describe it. It's a slice of life film, and the title says it all. It's just the life about a week of a girl in 8th grade, and it's not Hollywood. They don't fabricate a real plot to apply to it. It's just this tween who's not a kid anymore and who's not quite a teenager, who's kind of crossing that threshold. And it's just her dealing with life, just regular events in her life, but how difficult they can be at that age, and how we as adults kind of overlook all of that drama that this age group, that these kids are kind of dealing with in their normal lives. And this film just kind of spotlights it. And it was directed by Bo Burnham. He's a real creative guy, but he's probably known best for being a stand-up comedian.
Manic stand-up comedian, yeah.
Yeah, and so, he's not the kind of guy that you would expect to put out like a thoughtful, introspective film, but that's exactly what he's done. It's got a lot of humor in it. It's very entertaining. It's very accessible. You can watch it as an entertaining movie, not as like an art project. And that's a real testament to the skill that he brings to it. And Elsie Fisher, the young lady that they have as the star of the film, I mean, she's very good. Kid actors, you can't really measure them against adult actors, but for her age, she delivers a really great, nuanced, natural performance. And again, that's a credit to Bo Burnham, the director. And I just wanted to bring a little attention to this film as we wrap up the year.
Sure. Yeah, that one actually hit my list, one of my lists as well, which was the ones that I hadn't seen in 2018 that might actually have a chance to creep into my top 5 or top 10. The thing that intrigues me the most about that movie, to me, the way you describe it, is that Bo Burnham sort of bypassed the standard way to make a movie. Like, it doesn't sound like this is a result of him saying, all right, I'm going to read this book on how to write a screenplay, and I'm going to read this book on how to direct a movie, and bam, 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 I'm going to knock it out the way it's supposed to be done. It just sounds like it literally is just a brain dump from him.
Yeah.
That works. And
Yes.
and I like that kind of experimental filmmaking. I like it when people take chances and sort of avoid the typical types of structure. What drives me crazy is when they try to do the typical type of structure, but then they totally screw it up. And that doesn't sound like at all what this movie is. So I'm intrigued to check that out. And I guess I'll just mention a couple of real quick honorable mentions for me before we jump into number one. Now I wanted to get You Were Never Really Here in there because I liked Joaquin Phoenix in it so much, and because it was such a sort of strangely, in a good way, an interestingly directed movie, and of course all the Taxi Driver callbacks that I mentioned last time. So that was one that was somewhere in between 6 to 10 for me. I've only seen it the one time. I kind of want to give Annihilation another viewing.
Okay.
I enjoyed that one. The ending was a bit batshit. And, I just want to throw out there, Black Panther I enjoyed, but I want to put Avengers Infinity War in there, not as like an honorable mention for best of the year, but it genuinely had a shocking moment to me at the end of it that I wasn't familiar with the comic, so I didn't know it was coming. And man, it's rare when a popcorn comic book movie surprises me, and that ending just kind of like knocked me over. I had no idea that was coming. So I just wanted to give a little bit of love to, not that I just feel like, Marvel and the cinematic universe, they need a little bit of exposure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They need someone extolling their virtues.
I know. And I feel like we're the only two people out there shouting, hey, pay attention to these movies.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I have one other one that I have as an honorable mention, but it may or may not be your number one, so I don't want to mention it now. And
okay.
If it's not, then I'll mention it. So, why don't you go first with your number one?
All right. So my number one pick for my top 5 list of 2018 is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Okay. It is not the one I thought.
Okay. Well, I said when I reviewed this film originally that it might be the case, and looking back over the course of the entire year, I can say with a 100% certainty that it is the case. That is the most fun I had at the movie theater this year.
Wow, interesting.
It's just...
Because I know you had a lot of fun at Bohemian Rhapsody also.
I did, yes, yeah. I did. But Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is just... It's such a breath of fresh air. I mean, it's just... Yes, it's another superhero movie. Yes, it's another animated film, but it's so much more than both of those things. It's it doesn't feel like the other Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. It has a very unique, different feel from all of that. It exists only in itself. It's not connected to those other films. So you don't feel like you need to do homework to go into it. You can just sit down and be like, I don't know anything about Spider-Man. I don't know anything about these other characters. I don't know anything that's come before. And it doesn't matter.
Right.
This movie takes your hand and says, we're going to show you something new. And you get a brand new Spider-Man and a brand new adventure. And it's all wildly, wildly entertaining. It's not a perfect film. As I said in my review, the end runs 10 minutes too long. But I mean, when you think about that, if that's the biggest complaint that I can possibly offer for a film, then you know that's a pretty rock solid film. And I think it deserves the #1 slot.
I'm going to really have to effort to catch that in the theaters before it goes out. So,
if you do, tell me, because I definitely want to see it in theaters.
Okay,
again.
great. All right. So the other one that I thought might be your #1, because I thought you'd at least have it as an honorable mention. This was the other movie that was in the Blood War for my #5, along with A Quiet Place, before Roma swept in, and that was Black Klansman. That's the one that I thought might have somehow snuck its way into.
It is on my honorable mentions list.
Right. So yeah, Black Klansman was a really good one, really solid movie. And then I'll just throw out a few others that I feel like could hit my list if I had seen them, and I need to see them. First Man. Never saw First Man. I'm super intrigued by the direction in that, by the way you described it, because it sounds like it's right up my alley.
Yeah, that did not make an honorable mentions list. I created a subcategory just called Notable Absences.
Okay.
And notably missing from all of my lists are First Man and A Star Is Born.
Okay.
I think they're both solid films. They're both worth seeing films, but I don't think that they're... I don't think they're better than the sum of their parts.
This one's going to be kind of out of left field. I don't know if you've seen the trailer or not, but there's a remake of Suspiria. And after seeing the trailer for that, I kind of feel like I'm going to like that when I see it,
okay.
Especially since I found myself in this weird sort of horror place where I'm not a fan of that genre. But this year you had Mandy, you had A Quiet Place, you had Suspiria, which to me looks like it's going to be pretty good. And you had...
Your #1 pick?
My #1 movie of the year, which I know you vehemently disagree with, which is interesting. And that was Hereditary, Ari Aster's directorial debut, I think, of a feature-length film anyway. So another solid first effort by a director this year. I loved this movie. I came out of that movie with chills. I'm as surprised as you are that I liked it as much as I did, honestly. Toni Collette's performance, I was legitimately angry at the Golden Globes when she didn't get an award nomination for Best Actress, which is weird because I don't care at all about awards, but I liked her so much in this movie. I wanted her to be nominated. I hope the Academy sees fit to nominate her. I just love the direction in that movie. That was my #1 takeaway from that was just the direction. And yeah, there's a couple of moments in that movie that kind of take you out of the story for how extreme they are. But I kind of love how when I'm watching the film go along in the first hour or so, I'm like, this doesn't really even feel like a horror movie. This is more like a suspense movie. And then it just kind of goes off a cliff in the direction of horror. So I just really liked a lot of what the director did with the miniatures and the full, obviously the full size sets. He did a lot of really clever foreshadowing that I feel like I'll pick up more of if I once I get around to watching it again. I think this is not really a merit of the movie, but they sort of sold one type of movie in the trailer that kind of wasn't at all what the movie was when you actually saw the movie. And I was intrigued by that. Some of the side performances, Gabriel Byrne as the husband and father, I thought did a pretty good job in an understated role. And I mentioned Toni Collette. I'm forgetting the name of the actor that plays the son in the movie, but I thought he did a really good job. He's been in a couple of small roles. I feel like that guy's going to be kind of a big deal the longer his career goes on, even though I can't remember his name. But yeah, Hereditary for me, when I saw it, I thought to myself, man, this might end up being my favorite of the year because it came out in, I don't know, like February or March, and it managed to hold that mantle for me all year long. And I know you did not care for it. So if you want to speak on it in a minute, we can end it with a controversy, which we don't have a ton of, which is good.
Okay. To start with, Alex Wolff is the actor who played the son.
Thank you.
And he's very good. So this film, again, setting the stage, I'm not a huge horror film fan.
Me either.
but I like when they're well done. And, there are certainly horror films that I really, really, really love. And they're the usual suspects. They're the ones that, if people were to like list the top 5 horror films, yeah, those are the ones that I really, really like. So when a horror film kind of, raises from the swamps and actually stands out as something special, I tend to enjoy it. I tend to appreciate what stands out about it and what made it special. And this is one of those films that I can see a lot of the things that you're talking about. Toni Collette is really, really good in her role. The director does a really great job. It's not a standard horror film. It's not like a slasher movie, and it's not your typical, kind of supernatural film. It does occupy kind of its own unique space. But I had so many problems with it. There were so many things about that film that just kept pulling me out of the film and reminding me that what I was watching was just a horror movie. Like there's a moment early on in the film that is supposed to be dramatic, but it caused me to burst out laughing. And I think kind of that was the point where the director was probably lost me. I don't know that he ever won me back from that. And then I've got to say, I did not understand what was going on at the end of the film. I did not get it. Yeah. And there's a point at the very end where a character, and it was literally done as an afterthought, as an addition to the film, where a character tells the audience what it is that happened at the end of the film. Right. And if that had not been there, I would not have gotten it. And I know you did.
Oh yeah.
You understood.
He set the whole thing up. There was all kinds of foreshadowing and hints and clues. It was all there if you were into the movie. If you were immersed in the movie, you would have caught it. And knowing you, all the years I've known you and the way you watch movies, I know for a fact that had you actually been invested in the movie, you would have picked up on that stuff too. But because you sort of checked out early, it just didn't resonate.
And that makes sense because, like I said, there was a point where he definitely lost me.
Yeah.
And, I didn't realize that I had checked out, but I guess that's what had happened.
Yeah. And for me, the tragedy of Hereditary is the scene you're talking about at the end, where this director, I thought, went to great lengths to do a good job of using the foreshadowing and using some of the things that made his direction so great to kind of let you know all that was happening in the movie, which was just completely ruined to me by having a character monologue out exactly what happened. And I have to believe that was a studio mandated addition. And yet, when I had that reaction, and then Terrence saw it, and he tells me that he wouldn't have even had a clue what was going on if it wasn't for that. But I'm giving you a pass on that, like I said, because I think it's just because you weren't invested in the movie. But that almost ruined it for me at the end, because there's some very memorable shots in the end of that movie that still stick with me. Even though, like I said, Mandy is the movie that I think of the most, that comes to my brain the most. Mm-hmm. There's some visual elements of that movie, especially in that last 10 minutes that are just burned in my brain, and they're not going away anytime soon.
Well, to your point about that ending where the character does explain what's going on, you're right. That should not have been there, because at the end of that film, I'm like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. Now I understand that film, this movie. If that hadn't been there, then at least I would have been intrigued. At least I would have been like, okay, I need to rewatch this movie. Yeah, I need to figure out what happened, because I don't understand what's going on.
Right.
And then maybe I would have rewatched it a second time, and I would have seen everything that you saw and been able to piece it together. And I mean, we're both big fans of movies that you, the audience, have to pay attention to understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. I don't ever want a character to explain to me what's going on. Yep. The film needs to be crafted in such a way that I understand it. And obviously this movie I just, wasn't invested.
Just didn't resonate. Yeah. And I just, before we wrap it up, we mentioned a couple of the cast members. I also want to mention Ann Dowd, who played Joan, who is sort of the friend of Toni Collette in this movie. And she had a very, very important role as the movie goes on. And I thought she was phenomenal in this movie. And I really like her. I've seen her in a couple of things. There's always those actors that, it's that guy. You don't know their name initially. She's one of those character actors that every time I see her in something, I really seem to like her. So I was glad to see her in this. And she to me could be in my heart of hearts, I would love to see her get nominated too, but I'm not going to be greedy about Best Supporting Actress when I'm already being so damn greedy about Best Actress with Toni Collette. So
there you go. So the first 4 choices on our list matched up pretty well. Be interested to know how much they matched up with the thoughts of people at home. But our 2 number 1 picks could not have been more different.
Yeah.
So that's always a good sign for a pretty healthy movie year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely, there's a couple of movies over the year that you've mentioned that you mentioned Blaze a while back with Ethan Hawke. And I'd like to see that based on your description of it. And everyone talking about Spider-Verse, I'd love to see that one. And, there's a bunch of other ones. I could go down the list, but I'll spare you that. So that's pretty much it. That's our top 5. Anything else you want to add for this sort of end of the year wrap up?
But I had so much fun doing this. I think we should consider doing like a top 5 for movies we're looking forward to in 2019.
I'm up for that.
Lists are always fun.
Lists are great. Yeah, great hashtag content there. All right, guys, we appreciate you listening as always. You can hit us up on Twitter and yell at us about our choices at TechBloodPod. You can write a review for us on iTunes. That would be very helpful, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks a lot, guys.